So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome once again to the Renny Show. Hello, Jenny.
Hello, Rachel. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you? 1st of November, can you believe it?
Do you know, I was talking to a friend earlier and we were just saying, this year, is it something that old people say? This year has just, I'm not
Yeah,
quite sure how and why we've got to November so
I know.
fast. I'm
It's
not ready for
absolutely
this.
crazy, isn't it? Yeah,
Um,
same.
yeah.
Absolutely the same.
So
So if you're watching in, then please do pop us a comment. If you watch on replay, pop us a hashtag replay. We'd love to carry the conversation on in the chat. So please do get involved. This week, your fortnightly dose of honesty and positivity is going to be around the theme of perfection. You may have noticed we've been doing some themed shows recently, so this is one of them. So, like we said, if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, then please do. But we've thought of, again, obviously the surprise questions that the other one doesn't know about in advance, but all our questions this week are around the theme of perfection. So, shall we get started?
who's going first? Shall I go first, Rachel?
You go first. You go for it.
So perfection. What's your idea of perfection on a plate?
Ooh, perfection. I'm just typing it in so I can get it to scroll on the screen.
And the reason I did that because I was just checking that I got the timing right today, and you were
Yeah.
saying you just done the food shop, and I thought, oh, so that was where that inspiration came from. Was your food shop, your weekly food shop might not contain perfection on a plate. You're allowed to go wider than that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I have to say that my go-to answer when it comes to perfection on a plate is honey roasted parsnips. If I had to have a death row meal, it would be a roast dinner with honey roast parsnips. They're absolutely brilliant, and I love homemade parsnip soup as well. Oh, love parsnips. And I walked past the parsnips today and didn't buy any, so a bit strange. But that's probably my favourite thing. And obviously at this time of year in particular, it seems particularly relevant to be eating things like that, particularly the soup. So.
Well, I made some parsnip soup yesterday, so I have some left over
Lovely.
for my lunch today, and it was parsnip. This, we used to call it fridge bottom soup in
Yeah.
my day, in the olden days. So I had some parsnips, I had some carrots, I had an apple that was somebody
Ooh,
had given me that I wasn't sure whether it was a cooking apple or an eating apple, but it was a really big one.
okay.
Um, and some potato and some onions. So I made that into a soup with some ginger
Love.
and some garlic. And I have to say, it's lovely. It's really delicious. So sometimes those random recipes, perfection
Yeah,
happens by accident, doesn't it? Because I thought, oh,
absolutely.
and it's thick and it's really tasty. And because of the ginger, it's got a bit of a kick at the end,
Yeah.
just a little bit.
Nice warming.
And really delicious. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Absolutely. So
So,
yes.
so would soup be your idea of perfection on a plate then, or is it something different?
Mm. Um, I, I I was going to use the example. I like to not to have to choose. I like to have a
Okay.
little bit of everything.
Yeah.
So I remember going to a 40th wedding anniversary party at this beautiful restaurant. Um, and the dessert was a plate that had tiny little pieces of all the desserts on the menu, and I was
Brilliant.
in heaven because
Yeah.
it was just a little bit. They were all exquisite, and it was just a taste was enough. I sometimes don't want the whole
Yeah.
thing, just a little taste is enough.
Absolutely.
So I think my idea of perfection is obviously homemade. I'm a huge fan of homemade,
Yeah.
really good quality. I'm also a huge fan of eating things in season
Yeah.
because I think then they taste like they're supposed to taste.
Yeah.
So, and I also like the anticipation of looking forward to, strawberries in July,
Oh,
and they
definitely.
taste like strawberries, the imported ones and the ones that are grown in polytunnels, so that we can have strawberries on Christmas Day. Doesn't I
They're
don't
not quite
want
the same,
strawberries
are
on
they?
Christmas
No,
Day. They're not the same, are they? So I
no.
love it um when we grow when we eat the food that's in season,
Yeah,
because they
definitely.
taste like they're supposed to. Cox's apples.
Yeah,
Um, I think I said on a previous Renny show that um, autumn's a bit of a double-edged sword for me.
yeah,
Um, that kind of coming of dark, shorter days and things. So things like really lovely Cox's crunchy apples and parsnips and warming soups and lamb hot pot. All of those kind of really beautiful recipes kind of cheer you up a bit, don't they?
yeah, definitely, definitely. I couldn't agree more. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my first question for you, which is, can you talk about an example of a client of yours seeking perfection and beating themselves up for not achieving it?
There are so many.
Can I help
uh,
you?
there are so many.
Yeah.
Um, I think many clients who who want some coaching, it's quite often because they aren't where they would like to be,
Yes.
and they have a perception that um, they're not good enough at something,
Yeah.
or they are couldn't possibly do. So I think a really good example is of a client who uh, had been promoted into a role. So she was coming with the idea that it was something that she'd wanted for a long time.
Yeah.
She had applied previously and not been successful. This time she was successful. So she'd kind of been really, working really hard towards it. And within a month, she realized that actually she was really miserable
Yeah.
and it wasn't the role for her. And she hated it. And she was in the position where she felt that um, to admit to anybody outside a safe
Yeah.
space that she didn't, she wasn't happy, would
Yeah.
seem partly ungrateful. She felt stupid. She felt like that there must be something wrong with her because it
Yeah.
was her ideal job, and then it wasn't. So there must be something wrong with her. Um, and so the conversation was around. It was just a misfit. Um, and so the conversation we had was around. Sometimes. When we're really focused on something, we have an idea. Our expectation is different from the
Mm.
reality.
Yeah.
And what she was finding was that um, she was spending a lot of time doing what she would consider kind of admin, very detailed kind of admin, and she was further away from people
Yeah.
in her team. And she realized that actually the thing that she really, really loved was that the kind of relationships with her team, and she didn't have
Yeah.
the same level of interaction with her team because she'd handed that on
Yeah.
to her, if you like, the people kind of she was then managing. um and it was a wonderful example of sometimes we don't always we don't always recognize our strengths
Yeah.
because they come easy to us. And so she had underestimated how valuable and how valued those strengths were until she wasn't using them anymore. And she really missed it. Um, and I think with some conversation, and she went through all of those things about the inner critic that said, well,
Yeah.
this is a high level, this is what you've worked for, this is what you should need, this is how it should be, blah, 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 blah. And I said, but the bottom line is you're unhappy.
Yeah.
And if you're unhappy, how productive are you going to be, and what do you think the impact of that would be on, on the team? And of course, again, as we've said previously, it was her greatest fear was underperforming. So
Mm.
to admit that actually this wasn't the job for her, felt like people would think that she wasn't up to it, which
Yeah.
wasn't true at all. So the
No.
language that we use to ourselves
Yeah.
is really, really important, isn't it? Uh, and
Definitely.
eventually she felt able, when we'd worked it through, she felt able to go and say, to the CEO, I'm this job isn't for me.
Yeah.
Not because I can't do it, because I'm doing it, but actually it's not bringing me the job satisfaction and the joy. And because she had worked it through, I think, then I would say that, wouldn't I? Because she'd worked it through, and she'd rehearsed those conversations, and she knew what she wanted to say, and she was presenting data rather
Yeah.
than just, oh, I think I can't do it. She was really able to say, these are the aspects of the role that are really not my thing. Um, and actually at this point, I don't want them to become my thing.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not a spreadsheet queen. It's not I hadn't
Not my bag.
anticipated
Yeah.
um,
Mhm.
that. So I think because she could have a really clear conversation, she knew what she wanted, she knew what she didn't. Actually, the conversation with her CEO went really well, and they were able to um, move her to a different role that actually was much more suited to her. And it was a win-win-win situation, which is what you want in any
Yeah,
difficult,
absolutely.
potentially
Yeah.
difficult or tricky situation, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, this can kind of come in two halves really, because I think you've got the camp of people who feel they know what they want, and therefore they're, striving to, seeking to achieve it. But there's also the camp of people that don't actually know what they want, but they feel that they should know what they want. So they make all the moves of doing all these good things to look like they're being productive and successful, and achieving the things they believe they ought to be achieving, whether that's in the world of work, personal life, the balance between the two. I've talked to so many clients who, and you've alluded to it, the imposter syndrome behind closed doors, things not feeling right and sitting right with them. But then, and this resonates for me personally in my own journey as well, when the expectations of yourself in your ability to achieve all the different things that are going on in your life, and seeking perfection in all of them, and then beating yourself up because you're doing them all but not doing any of them very well, because you're spreading yourself too thin, which I think I am definitely guilty of at times, and it's something I'm much, much more aware of now. And I think, I don't know what you think about this. It In the client work I've done, it does seem to be a mostly female phenomenon or phenomena. The expectations that women have of themselves to work, to earn money, to contribute to the household, to look after the children, to run the household, balancing all of these things. And it doesn't have to just be women, but I just feel it's perhaps predominantly women who really feel under pressure to be this perfect, wife, mum, business owner, all the different roles you could think to add. And I think it's very, very common to then beat yourself up for the fact that you're not achieving all those things. And you think, well, that's when the self-doubt starts creeping in, isn't it? Because you think, well, maybe actually I'm not very good because I'm not achieving all these things in the way I would want to. And I've definitely been there. So I think it's about, for me, there's a big element of acceptance that can come into this, where you're accepting that perfection isn't the goal. I think you can be too focused on, you know, achieving things in this perfect image that you have in your head. But perfection isn't the goal. Just you know, allowing yourself the space to say, right, well, I can't achieve all of it, but I can achieve that, that, and that's where I'm going to put my focus, and I'm going to let the rest go and accept that that's how things are, and that that's what I need to do right now. You're nodding in agreement by the look of it.
Well, I think there's three things I think. Firstly, perfection in and of itself is a myth, isn't it?
Yes.
Because perfection's different for everybody. So your idea of perfection and my idea of perfection might be very different, and it's that kind of, they're just different. I think secondly, that this multitasking, that, you know, men can't multitask and women are brilliant at it. Actually, nobody's brilliant at
No.
multitasking. And we've kind of given ourselves, almost, we've kind of given ourselves the stick,
Yeah.
going, oh, we're brilliant at multitasking because we have to be. And then we beat ourselves with it when we're not quite, you know, there's a finite amount of things. And I'm absolutely, hand on heart, I am the, you know, the the archetypal kind of multitasker. I've been there, got the t-shirt, got several t-shirts in different
You know.
sizes because I did it for so many years. And this thing about, well, I have to do this and I have to do that,
Yeah.
and you're running around and you're making sure that, you know, your children you've cooked the dinner before you've gone to work, and you've you know, you're always anticipating. And I think the issue with that, or one of the many issues other than exhaustion and
Yeah.
burnout, is that we don't look after our needs. We're so
Yeah.
busy looking after everybody else's needs. um and secondly, that we don't live in the moment, because we almost don't enjoy the moment, because we're
Yeah.
always thinking, oh, when I get home, I've got to, instead of thinking, oh, it's bedtime stories, I love reading bedtime stories, and that nighttime routine, half of you're not really present, because
Yeah.
half of your brain's thinking, I've got to put the washing on, I've got to do the gym kit for tomorrow, I've got to make the
Yeah.
sandwiches, I've got
Oh
to
God.
do
Yeah.
something. So actually,
Yeah.
we're missing a huge amount, and I think that contributes to the not feeling great, because you're thinking, I'm not really enjoying reading this bedtime story in the way that I
Mm.
would normally, because half my head's thinking about all the other stuff I've got to do. And then I've got to then you know, kind of chat to my husband or whoever, to make sure he's there. So I
Yeah.
think that whole thing is a nightmare. And yes, Brené Brown has a lovely talk where she talks about the different. I don't think it's a male, or I don't think it's worse for women. I think it's different.
Yeah.
So men have been given different box that they have to
Yeah.
tick.
Yeah.
So they struggle with the thing about, they have to be a breadwinner, they have to be
Have to be
incredibly
strong.
successful, they have to be strong, they have to be
Yeah.
problem solving, they have to be able to put shelves up, they have to be, you know, manly and muscly and do all that stuff. And actually, those of them who, and if you're too nice, then you're not going to get promoted. If you want to stay at home and say, actually, I'm really happy, you know, for you to be the career person, and I'll
Yeah.
stay at home and do all this stuff, because actually it really floats my boat, and I can work from home, so we can do it that way. And I've been in a situation where, you know, some men have done that, and, you know, and they come gamely to toddler groups and things,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
people kind of look at them a bit, you know. It's tricky. So I
Yeah.
think,
Yes.
um notwithstanding the whole kind of patriarchy thing, which, you know, we're not, that's a whole other program, isn't
Yeah.
it?
That's another show.
um that's a whole nother show. But I think that those really high expectations that all of us, regardless of gender, give ourselves, and those, some of them are historic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
actually, they're asking ourselves whether they're realistic. And in the old, I was talking about this the other day, you know, in the olden days, when I was little, you know, it was unusual for both parents to be working,
Yeah.
going out to work. And my dad would go out to work, and my mum would do the domestic. She worked, she did stuff, but she worked from home around the children.
Yeah.
Multitasking again. But but everything stopped on a Sunday because the shops were all shut,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
people rested.
Yes.
You went out. I remember, going out for walks on a Sunday, the whole family. The shops weren't open. You didn't go to the pictures. There was nothing on the telly. Um, Old film. But we didn't. It was time that you spent out in
Mm.
nature, or digging in the garden, or whatever it was, playing games, board games. So it was a much that there were breaks, natural breaks,
Yeah.
in the week, because we now have a 7 day a week, 20, we're always on.
Yeah.
There is no natural break, is there? So
No,
I think
no.
it's really important for us to put those breaks in place.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we know what causes burnout. You'd think it would be, because we know, you'd think it would be on the decline, and it isn't. It's on the
No, it's on the
increase.
increase. Yeah.
And that's really that
Mm.
worry, it's really concerning, because we're not getting it, are we? We're just
No,
like,
no, no, it's terrible, isn't it? So, I mean, that's a great message for all of you folks. I'd love to know if you're listening what you think. I think the message here is about giving yourself a break, not being so hard on yourself, and perhaps add a bit of realism to your existence about what's actually possible and achievable without burning out. Because let's face it, none of us want to burn out, do we? And I must just say a quick hi to Carol, who's watching, because she's commented, one of our regular watchers. So thank you very much for being here. Okay, time for the next question, Jenny. So I think it's your turn.
it is. I'm going to lighten the mood a bit, because that was quite a serious. That was quite, and
Yeah.
that's what I love about the Renny show, that we cover all
Light
sorts
and
of
shade,
topics.
light and shade.
Yeah, exactly. So I was thinking about, when I was preparing
Okay.
my questions, I was thinking about all the songs that
Mm.
have got perfect in the title.
Ooh, okay.
Um, and there are quite a few. Um,
Mm.
so I was going to ask you if you had any songs that came to mind, songs that you love, that had perfect in the title.
Okay. I'm just typing that to get it in the window. Title. Okay, so I will just put that up on the screen so people can see it. Okay,
And
well,
obviously, if you're watching on replay, then if you've got any songs that you think, oh, I love that song, and actually, it's got perfect in the title.
yeah. Well, I mean, the first and possibly the most obvious one that comes to mind is "Perfect" by Fairground Attraction, because it's just called Perfect, and that's a brilliant song. And I can remember when it came out and thinking what a positive song it seemed. But of course, again, when you think about the lyrics, it's got to be perfect. Does it have to be perfect? But it's got to be perfect. It's got to be worth it. Which all makes sense, absolutely. But does it have to be perfect? I think I quite like the phrase "done is better than perfect," and that's something that I adopt far more these days. Done is better than perfect. Last night's Halloween decorations of the house being an example. Done was better than perfect. I could have done more. I chose not to, because there just wasn't the time. And it just wasn't feasible. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think with all things like songs and films and all the kind of the audio and visual media things that we're all exposed to, I think there are so many messages, aren't there, that that obviously the person that wrote that song really felt, believed in that message. And of course, when you hear something in a song, if you like the song, then it stays with you and the lyrics stay with you. Is that good or is that bad? I think that can go both ways. It can make you have perhaps unrealistic expectations for what your own life is then going to look like. But then equally, you kind of think to, well, I think to myself, yeah, but it's just a song. Do I need to take it that seriously? But I think it can go either way. That's a really interesting one. I like that. What did you come up with when you thought about it?
Well, it was funny when you said the most obvious. I thought you were going to say I thought you were going to say "Perfect Day" by Lou Reed.
Oh, of
Because that's the one that
course.
immediately that was the when I was thinking. I thought so I love the fairground attraction, but that was about fourth on my list.
Okay.
So I thought the Lou Reed one, and obviously it's been covered by lots of people, hasn't it?
Yeah,
Kirsty
yeah,
McCall did a great cover. But the thing, and obviously in that song, he talks about different things they did in the,
yeah.
in the day, didn't he? But the lyric that I really love, it says, it's such I'm not going to sing it, although I'm quite tempted. It's such a perfect day. I'm glad I spent it with you.
Yes. Oh,
Um, and
yeah,
that for me, and then it talks about you keep me hanging on. So I
yeah,
think that for me captures perfection, because
yeah.
it's about that relationship where if you can, it's not necessarily what you do, it's who you do it
Yes.
with.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can support each other, and whether that's with friends, with relatives, with family, whoever it is, your chosen person, actually it's less about what you do, and
Yes.
more
I
about who
agree.
you do it with.
Definitely. Oh, I absolutely love that. Yeah, I didn't think of that song at all, but as soon as you said it, absolutely. Yeah, I'm right with you on that. And those lyrics you just quoted, yeah, I think they're fantastic. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that one. Okay, so I'm going to go on to my next question. So, what are your thoughts on the personal impacts of those who are seeking perfection in elite sport?
Well, I do have some thoughts. Obviously, I am not an elite sports
Neither am I.
person. I just need to say that in case anybody thought I was hiding my light under a bushel. I'm not an elite sports person. However, I know some people who play sport at high level,
Yeah,
and I think um, I think they they want to be the best, don't they? They're
yeah,
always pushing themselves, um, and seeing how far they can go and how good they can
mm,
be, and I admire them for their their tenacity and their commitment, because it takes a lot, doesn't it? You hear of these, you hear of
absolutely.
people
Yeah,
putting hours and hours and hours every day, weeks and weeks
yeah.
and weeks. I just recently watched the David Beckham
Oh,
documentary.
I haven't watched it.
um it's good. And he talks about that, every moment in the garden, he was
Mm,
doing it for fun because
yeah,
he just loved it, but there was an element, but then his father would train him,
yeah,
and kind of go, do it again, do it again, do it again. um so that I think there is that. I suppose the key for me is that if you're enjoying it,
yeah,
then carry on, I think. But I do think there is a cost, a physical cost. And when you think of fabulous people like Rafa Nadal
yeah,
and our own Andy Murray, the cost in terms of physical damage
yeah.
impact, that's caused by that relentlessness,
Mm,
I think is a high price to pay when you're young, because
yeah.
they're in their 40s ish, 30s.
Early.
Yeah,
Sure,
they're at
yeah,
they're at young end.
yeah.
And if our life expectancy is to live, and till sort of 80s, 90s, that's a long time to live with a body that doesn't work quite as it
Mm,
should, because you've
absolutely.
absolutely pounded it into the ground. um and I think there are many high performing athletes who then find it quite a challenge to readjust when their career
Yes.
has, that part of their career has come to an end. I
Yes.
think it can
What's
be quite,
left? Who are they?
I think
Yeah.
it's quite difficult to
Yeah.
adjust to life as a retired elite athlete. Some of them
Mm.
make the transition brilliantly. I think a lot of people struggle, and they apply that same performance mentality to
Yeah.
everything else that they do, which can be interesting to work with.
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing that comes to mind for me is the amount. I mean, if I guess it depends what sport you do, but most people generically would consider the Olympics or the Paralympics as the pinnacle in any given sport. I know not all sports are represented, but if we use that as an example, the amount of gold medal winning Olympians and Paralympians who have achieved their gold medal or a plethora of gold medals, and then they don't know where to go from there because they've achieved, they had this perfect image in their mind about what success meant, and it was winning a gold medal, and then they come out the other side. Well, what's next then? I've done it. I've done the perfect thing that was available in my given sport. What's next? Who am I without it? I think that's. I imagine it's thought about a lot more these days in elite sport. And obviously there's a lot of coaching. In terms of not just the physical stuff, but the mind stuff. There's a lot
Mm.
more of that going on in elite sport these days. So hopefully. People perhaps these sportsmen and women perhaps do have more awareness around who else are they, because no one can just be about one thing. There's
No.
different facets to all of us. So hopefully that's something that's they're all more aware of now. But yeah, I've always found it quite heartbreaking when you hear gold medal winners talking about the fact they then came back and crashed and they couldn't train. They just could not be motivated. And yet they had spent years and years being motivated and doing everything they needed to every day, like you've said, training for hours and hours, days on end, doing everything that was asked of them by their coaches and mentors. And yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it, for them? I'm sure.
And I think sometimes for people who, um, you know, um, who've got to a certain level, and then the next level up is
Yeah,
just too high,
yeah,
and so they feel that they've not achieved,
yeah. They've fallen
and they've
short.
not got there, and it can actually have a really detrimental impact,
Yeah.
because they think they then, as we said before, that inner critic going, well, I must be, if I can't make that standard, it must be because I'm not good enough, and that
Yes,
whole
it's my fault.
I
I'm not good enough.
failed, I'm not good enough, and it can.
Yeah,
I've certainly had friends with children who've played at high level who've then not quite made it, you know,
yeah,
and actually it's turned them completely off the sport, and they've
yeah.
stopped playing it because it
Which
isn't
is a
fun
shame.
anymore,
Yeah,
because if they can't play competitively, then they don't want to play at all. And I personally, I get it,
yes,
but I think it's really sad. It feels like a huge loss,
yeah,
to
yeah,
not be able to get joy out of something that you spent such a long time doing.
yeah. Particularly when they used to get so much joy from it. It's a real shame, isn't it?
Mm,
A real loss. I
yeah.
mean, a grieving process. I would go so
Yeah,
far as to say.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so it's your turn again for a question.
Um, this is this is another slightly random one, but I had a story in mind when I was thinking. So, can you give me an example um, of a perfect disaster?
Ooh, okay. So
I don't mean disaster as in, earthquakes and things. I meant
yeah,
disaster as in, I don't know, an outfit or um, a party, or
yeah.
something that happened that you had planned and it didn't go quite as you had, or a journey. had a few of those in my life.
Yeah.
Disastrous journeys.
Well, yeah. A very good example comes to mind, which essentially culminated in me having a breakdown. When I first joined the Air Force, I joined as a fighter controller, as it was called then. It's got a different name now. It changes every week, I'm sure. But I was so dead set on achieving the qualification and getting through the training. I'd had setbacks early on in training. That was perhaps a warning sign. With hindsight, it's easy to look back and say, yeah, that was the first warning sign. But no, I persevered. I suppose there was a lot of my own pride and self-worth tied up in it. And it wasn't that I wanted to be perfect necessarily, but I really wanted to achieve it. I was really driven to achieve my qualifications as a controller, controlling aircraft. And it really was a perfect disaster because it was not the right job for me at all. I was sort of nudged in that direction because I passed the aptitude test. So from the Air Force's point of view, it was a suitable role, no problem at all. However, I think there's levels within the aptitude, and I was on the lower end of the scale. So I spent a few years hanging on by fingernails, desperate. It can be quite an elitist environment at times. So I was desperate to not let anyone down. And again, it wasn't that I was striving for perfection, but I was striving to be good, and I was striving to be as good as those around me and striving not to let anybody down. But it did turn into a perfect disaster because over a period of years of me doing the job, my brain literally went wibble. I was sat in the ops room controlling a significant number of aircraft, all with human beings inside them that we need to keep safe. And I went wibble. It was literally a great example of a perfect storm that had all culminated in that moment. And it literally felt like something just sort of snapped almost in my brain at the time. So I think the key thing there's lots of things I learned from that experience, and I was very fortunate to go and join the logistics branch instead after that in the Air Force, and had a really enjoyable career. But noting the warning signs of what's going on for yourself. So my biggest learning was definitely self-awareness around that, of what makes you strive for something even when you start realizing it's not the right thing. And that's definitely a big lesson that I took away. Yeah, for sure.
And the noticing that, the thing that stuck out for me, you said it in your, is there were warning signs
Yeah.
that I didn't, there were flags, and I didn't notice them. And nor, I'm assuming, I'm making an assumption here, nor were the people who were supporting you, they didn't notice them either, or did they?
Well, I kept it very quiet. All the people I worked with, no one had a clue.
Okay.
The day I finally went wibble, I went to my boss afterwards, after that particular session, that sortie, and I said to him, I can't ever control aircraft again. And he was
Can't do
really
this.
shocked. He said, what? Where's this come from?
Oh, okay.
This has been building over a period of years here. But they had no idea, because I had this facade up, trying to be as good as I could be, there was a big desire to not let the team down, to not let anyone down by showing up that I wasn't good enough at doing that job. And actually, hindsight being a wonderful thing, I should never have been put in that role in the first place. It shouldn't have been just based on aptitude test. If it had been based on personality as well, they would have seen clearly that I needed to be in a role where I was around people. People is where I thrive. And so I then thrived afterwards once I'd got through the breakdown. But yeah, lots was learned, but it was a perfect disaster.
And I think the masks that we wear, and
Yes.
the hiding is such a powerful thing to share. So thank you for doing that. That sharing of, actually there are times when we all use a mask to kind of,
Yeah.
I could do the mask as well. The sun's just
Done.
moved, and it's stopped raining, so the sun's come out. Yes, the um the mask that we wear,
Yeah.
that to keep us, well, we think they're keeping us safe, don't we? But
Yeah.
actually they're
Yeah.
not
But they're
keeping us
not.
safe.
No. So damaging. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about for you?
What mine was really light-hearted.
Oh.
So I feel slightly, and it was a weekend. It was that kind of, be prepared, I think, probably, but it was a really good example of, actually, when you're multitasking, this is what happens. So
Yeah.
I had booked a special romantic weekend away with my then husband, and we had left, sorted everything out, and managed the children, all of that stuff. Left the house. He said, "Do you know where you're going?" And I said, "No, I thought you had the tickets." You can tell how long ago it was. "I thought you had the tickets." And he said, "No, I didn't have the tickets. I thought you had them." So I had to go back,
Oh.
get the tickets, got the tickets, got stuck in traffic. So we missed, we were supposed to be having lunch with friends, and they were
Yeah.
sitting waiting in the restaurant, before the days of mobile phones. So
Of
we couldn't
course. If you
phone
let
them
me
to
know.
say,
Oh. Yeah.
we're stuck in traffic. So they were thinking something terrible had happened. I think they were on their pudding by the time we kind of rushed into the door. We got to the hotel. It was Harrogate, lovely. We got to Harrogate, to this fabulous hotel with my tickets for my
Yeah.
fabulous weekend, and it had things like the theatre and champagne and chocolates and flowers and all of that stuff included. And I gave them my voucher, my tickets, and they said, "Oh, the company who booked this has gone into liquidation, so actually we haven't booked your room." Yeah,
Oh no. Oh,
we
Jenny.
haven't booked your room. We haven't booked your room. And they could see my face, which was obviously
Yeah.
just miserable. Um, and they said, "But obviously we can see that you're really upset." And I was like, "Well, I am, but I did the logistics
Yeah.
of this perfect weekend, that to get here have been phenomenal." So they found us a room, and they said, "Well, we haven't got any chocolates, and we haven't got any champagne, and we haven't got any flowers, but and we haven't got the suite that you ordered, but we've got the kind of room in the attic. Will that do?" And it's like, "Well, if it's a choice of that or sleeping in the car, then we'll have that."
Yeah. We'll take
Um,
it.
and so everything about the weekend had just been a disaster, really. Anyway, we managed to have a nice time in Harrogate. And when we were leaving, and we were going down to my parents, and um, couldn't find the car keys in the morning. Couldn't find the car keys.
Oh
So of course
no.
well, you must have put them somewhere. No, I haven't put them. It turned out that my husband had left them in the door of the car.
Oh.
Um, and I said, "We're so lucky that," and because there were it was in November.
Yeah.
Maybe this is why I don't like November. There were
Maybe.
Christmas presents in the car,
Yeah.
with the key, and the reason that I said, "We're so lucky that nobody stole the
Yeah.
car."
Yeah.
The reason nobody stole the car is because when we got in it, it wouldn't start. And we had to call the AA out
Oh
to
no.
get us going. Um,
Oh,
yeah, so
bless you.
so by the time we arrived at my parents, we weren't actually speaking. So what had turned what had been planned, I had such high expectations of
Yeah, it
this
sounded
weekend.
wonderful. Yeah. Not so
And
much.
it however, it's a great story, and kind
Yeah.
of, so we weren't speaking by the time we got to my parents. So every time so maybe that's why November doesn't figure
Yeah, I think there
highly
could
in
be
my
some further
months to love.
reflection in that for you, Jenny.
Of
Yeah.
So
Fantastic.
sometimes, all we could do is laugh in the end,
Yes.
because at every point something went wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
But there you
bless
go.
you.
We live, we live, we live
We
to speak another day, fight
yes.
another day.
Yeah. Live and learn all that. Okay, so I'll move on to my last question, which is another more light-hearted one. Would you complain if the food was not right in a restaurant?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Yes, I'm not very British in that sense. And the reason I would complain, and I would do it nicely, um, the reason I would complain is that if um, unless they know what's not right, they
Yeah,
don't have an opportunity to correct it.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
if when they come around and say, "Is it okay?" and you go, "Yes, lovely," and actually it's horrible, um, then they're not gonna improve anything, are they?
Yeah,
Whereas if you say, um, I don't know, this meat's tough, or actually it's not very nice, then you can, then you give them the opportunity to put it right.
yeah, absolutely. And
Um,
I think, like you've alluded to there, there's ways of going about it, isn't there? And I think that's
yes.
kind of what I had in my head when I thought of this question, because I've seen some terrible examples of people just going absolutely ballistic at staff because something wasn't right, and it clearly wasn't that person's fault. Um, but I just always think there's no need to be rude to anyone about it. It's a different story if the venue itself, if the staff are being unprofessional about it, then I get that things would escalate. But I always think there's a diplomatic way of approaching it. You can do it with kindness whilst still getting your message across that, look, this really isn't good enough. We're paying money for this. This isn't right,
And
or
most of the
I'm not paying for it.
most of the time, it's a genuine. People. I'm a great believer in and I help people with their customer experience programs. So we
Yeah,
do a lot of this. Um, and most I believe nobody goes to work most of the time
yeah,
with an intention other than to do the best that they can. And
yeah,
sometimes, as we have spoken about, sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes things, don't work as they and I think it's most of the time it's a simple this my soup isn't hot,
yeah.
or there's a fly in my salad. They didn't kind of put it there on purpose. It was,
No,
most of the time it can be put right, and what you want is somebody to say, "I'm terribly sorry," recognize that there's an
yeah,
issue and fix it.
yeah,
And if it's not, but quite often I think people, um as you say, get cross, or
yeah.
they complain about the person, they make it personal, and
Yes,
actually
and there's
it's
no
the
need.
food, not the waiter's fault or the
Yeah,
waitress. um um and if you can, if you can stick to the facts,
yeah.
you can explain why it isn't what you wanted. Sometimes people, they don't like what they've ordered. There's nothing wrong with what they've ordered. They don't like
They
it.
just don't
So
like it.
don't
Yeah, that's
pretend there's
different.
something wrong with it just
Yeah,
because you don't like it. That's a whole different thing, isn't it?
yeah,
Um, but I think there's normally a way, as with any complaints, most of the time, if you are polite, it always gets you further, doesn't it?
yeah,
Than
definitely.
and I appreciate that if you don't get the response that you want, or the
Yeah,
response that would be helpful, and somebody shows that they're listening, then it's very easy to get, because um, you're
yeah,
already in your fight flight mode,
yeah,
aren't you? Potentially, just because of the worry of having to, the anticipation of having to complain. So people are already on the edge. So it doesn't take a lot for it to escalate,
yeah,
and that's never going to be a good outcome.
yeah, absolutely. I just want to go to some comments we've had actually from Donna Eade on via LinkedIn, and she says a perfect disaster. I had one of those in my launch last week where my email system totally failed 5 hours before I was meant to do a live web class. Oh my goodness, that definitely sounds like a perfect
Oh no,
disaster. I
and
hope it was all
and it
resolved.
is. And you've lived to tell the tale. And I think that's the thing, is that when you're in the moment, you can't imagine, can you,
No,
how you're going to get through it. And of course, because we're incredibly resilient as human beings, we do. And what
yeah,
you realise is that actually most people, most of the time, won't mind if their
Yeah.
email is 10 minutes late or a half an hour or 24 hours late. And actually, if we say, it's that honesty, isn't it, about saying,
Yeah.
the email, my email went down. There was nothing. And that's the joy of technology when it works, is the joy of technology. When it doesn't, it's
Absolutely.
like,
Yeah.
oh, we've got so reliant on it, haven't
Yeah.
we?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
oh,
But she
thank you for
also,
sharing that with us.
yeah, and she's made another comment as well. She said, I did the same with uni. I went to do the teaching degree that I thought I wanted. And because it was hard to get accepted, when I did, I saw it as a sign I should do it. And I froze on my first really easy at the end of year one. And I had a wibble too and didn't go back. There was no support either. I mean, that's, I'm sad to hear that's happened for you, Donna. And more than anything, sad to hear that you didn't have the support to
Support.
help get through it, that, because that's, for me, that was something that I was supported through the situation I was in, which I will always be grateful for. So I hope that all came out in the wash eventually, Donna, and hopefully didn't stay with you too badly. But it sounds like perhaps you went on to something else. I don't know. I'd love to know. Did you go then on to something else once you realised, or did you stick with it? It's a difficult one, isn't it? Always a difficult choice.
And I think sometimes we can learn as much from what we don't want.
Yeah.
When you think, oh, I'm never going to do that again,
Yeah.
you learn as much from that, don't you, as when things go wrong, or as you
Absolutely.
found out, you kind of,
Yeah.
we appreciate what we really, really love, rather than trying to do everything. And I think it's one of the things in schools that we try and get people to be brilliant at everything. It's like, actually, we're
Doesn't
not
work,
brilliant
does
at
it? It's not
everything.
like that.
Much better to really hone the things that you love doing,
Yes.
because the things that you don't, somebody else will love doing. Let them do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really pleased to say that Donna's story has a happy ending. She says she went back and did history with creative writing and got her degree. Well done you, Donna. That's absolutely fantastic.
Fantastic.
We like a
So we'll be
happy
reading
ending.
your book shortly then.
Fantastic. Love it. Right, well, goodness, we've gone just over 52 minutes, Jenny. We're quite a show today. I think we were right to do a show on perfection. We said all along, didn't we? Every time perfection comes up in any of our shows, we always said we could do a whole show on this. Well, I think we've
done a show and a half, really.
Show and a half, yeah. Really correct. So thank you so much to anyone that has joined us and commented, joined in the conversations. Absolutely brilliant to have you with us. We will be back again in 2 weeks, and I'm just going to check my calendar to see. There's no particular theme. So next fortnight's time show will just be free for all random. So if anyone has any questions you'd like to pose either on the day or in advance that we can ask each other, then please do get involved. We'd love to know. But apart from that, thank you once again, Jenny, for your time, and I shall look forward to seeing you again in a fortnight.
Thank you as ever, Rachel. I always feel I always leave these our little show feeling buzzing and energized and having learned stuff. So we hope that everybody who's listened or who will listen will also feel that they've learned something, that they've got something to take away, and that they've had tasty. It's been tasty.
That's the hope. That's the hope. Right. Well, it's time for us to sign off. So take care all, and we will see you in a fortnight. Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.